Okay, so picture this. You buy a piece of land for millions of dollars. But here's the catch. You can never, ever physically touch it. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that wasn't some far-off dream. That was the reality at the absolute peak of the Metaverse hype. And today, we're going to dig into the project that was right at the center of it all, Decentraland.
You know, it really wasn't that long ago. If you were in crypto, there was this feeling, this shared belief that you just couldn't escape. It was everywhere. It felt like the next big thing, the next evolution was right around the corner.
And that future, it had a name, the Metaverse. And listen, it wasn't just an idea. For a while there, it felt like the only story that mattered. Seriously. Digital land was selling for millions. Huge companies were setting up virtual headquarters. These new 3D worlds were going to be the next internet. And right at the heart of that whole revolution, you guessed it, Decentraland.
And if you really want to wrap your head around just how insane the hype got, just look at this number. $2.4 million. That's what someone paid for a single plot of digital land in Decentraland. Just let that sink in for a second. We're not talking about a house or a skyscraper. We're talking about pixels on a screen.
So of course, that leads us to the big and maybe slightly uncomfortable question we've got to ask today. Was this really the start of a brand new internet? Or was it just a story, a narrative that got way too big, way too fast for what the market could actually handle? All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so before we jump into what happened next, let's actually rewind a bit. We got to go back to the beginning to really get it. We need to understand the dream, right? What was this big, grand vision that got so many people so excited in the first place?
So, at its core, yeah, Decentraland is a decentralized metaverse built on the Ethereum blockchain. But let's break that down. In simple terms, it's basically this: a virtual world where you, the user, are in charge. You can buy, you can own, and you can build whatever you want on your own little piece of the digital universe.
Okay, so how does a world like this actually work? I mean, how do you even build an economy completely from scratch? Well, it really boils down to two key ingredients. First up, you've got something called land. The whole virtual world is chopped up into these little parcels, and every single one is a unique NFT. The easiest way to think about it is like a digital deed to a house. You know, it's verifiable, it's one of a kind, and it proves on the blockchain that you own that spot. It's your property, and you can build whatever you can possibly imagine on it.
And then, to actually do anything in this economy, you need mana. Mana is the money of Decentraland. Simple as that. It's the currency you use to buy land or digital clothes for your avatar or pretty much any other asset in this world. So the key takeaway here is super simple. Mana is the money, land is the property. And this really gets to the core of the problem Decentraland was trying to solve. See, on the internet we all use every day, what we call Web 2, you don't really own your digital stuff. Think about it. The platforms do. Decentraland's promise was this radical shift to a Web 3 world, a world where your ownership of your digital assets is actually real, it's verifiable, and nobody can just take it away from you.
And man, that radical idea of true digital ownership, it absolutely caught fire. So let's rewind to that exact moment. The moment this whole thing stopped feeling like some niche little project and started looking like the honest-to-God beginning of a new 3D internet. So, a little backstory. Decentraland had actually been cooking since 2015. They had their initial coin offering, their ICO, way back in 2017 to raise money. But its defining moment, that was without a doubt the huge market boom of 2021. This is when the whole Metaverse story just exploded into the mainstream.
I mean, during that peak, everybody wanted a piece of the action. You had major brands buying up virtual storefronts. You had digital concerts and fashion shows packed with avatars. People were flipping land like it was prime real estate in Manhattan. It genuinely truly felt like we were watching the dawn of a completely new era.
But, as we all know, that kind of fever pitch just doesn't last forever. And then, the market shifted. Completely. So let's finally answer that central question. What in the world happened after all that hype?
Well, the market's focus just shifted. And it shifted fast. The Metaverse, which had been the star of the show, was suddenly not the main story anymore. All that attention and all that money pivoted hard toward new narratives. You had the absolute explosion in AI, which was showing tangible, mind-blowing progress. And you had this huge race to build L2s, solutions to make blockchains like Ethereum faster and cheaper. That suddenly became the most urgent problem to solve.
And this right here is probably the most important takeaway from this whole story. The problem for Decentraland wasn't some big technical failure. The platform still worked just fine.
No, the problem was a crisis of attention. Because in the world of crypto, attention is literally everything. When a story loses attention, it loses the flow of money, it loses the speculation, it loses the new users, it just loses liquidity.
So, that brings us to today. Where does all this leave Decentraland now? Is it just a ghost town, a relic of a past bull run? Well, the reality, as it usually is a little more complicated than that.
So, the first thing to get is that Decentraland didn't just vanish. Nope, the ecosystem is still active. There are still virtual events happening, people are still in there creating experiences, and its governing body, the DAO, the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, is still funding new developments. But let's be real, the reality is clear. Today, it's more of a niche ecosystem for a dedicated community of believers. It's not that world-changing force it once looked like it was gonna be.
The promise? That idea of true digital ownership? That's still there. But the real challenge for Decentraland has totally shifted. It's not about proving the tech works anymore. Now it's about a much, much harder fight, competing for actual active users against the absolute giants of Web 2. We're talking about Roblox and Fortnite, platforms that already have these massive built-in audiences.
So, what could the future actually hold? I kind of see three main possibilities here. The positive one? A whole new wave of interest, maybe combining AI, VR, and gaming, could suddenly make Decentraland a really key piece of digital social infrastructure. The middle-of-the-road outcome? It just remains a sustainable, cool, niche world for crypto-native communities. And, well, the negative scenario? It just becomes a historical footnote, a symbol of that wild 2021 hype cycle.
You know, when you zoom out, maybe the best way to look at Decentraland isn't just as a product. Maybe it's better to see it as a grand experiment, right? It's an ongoing test of what true digital property could even look like on the internet. And even though that deafening, crazy hype has faded away, that core idea, well, that's very much still alive.
Which leaves us with one last big question to think about. Is the metaverse, the one envisioned by projects like Decentraland, still the future of the internet? Or is it just a brilliant idea that showed up to the party a little too early?